Hi Year 12s, so today we'll be looking at NREM and REM sleep. Now there's certain areas that have been taken out, I'll indicate where they are, but my best recommendation is when you're making your notes is actually to make a table which actually breaks down the stages of NREM and REM because it is a lot of information. So, over the course of a typical night's sleep, we experience two distinctly different states or types of sleep known as NREM sleep or non-rapid eye movement sleep and REM sleep or rapid eye movement sleep. So they both have similar characteristics. In other words, sleep is reversible, you do disengage from what's going on around you, you are unresponsive to a certain degree, but there are differences between the two. So this is a hypnogram. I strongly recommend that you copy and paste this into your notes. So a hypnogram or a sleep graph shows the different stages of NREM and REM sleep periods and how they alternate throughout the night in a cyclical way with one following the other. So you may want to pause this every now and again just to get this right. So when you're awake, see this green section here? This indicates that you're awake. Now, it would look like that you've gone straight into REM sleep. That is not correct. It looks like that, but it's not. All right. So, as you're awake, you go into you start falling asleep, and you start going into NREM stage 1, and you'll spend some time there. See how there's a little step, right? And then you'll fall into stage 2, and then you'll spend longer there, then into stage 3, and then stage 4, which is a deep sleep. Then you start going backwards through the stages. So 3, 2, but you don't go into 1. See how you don't spend any time in 1 for that one? So you go up to 1, and then here's where you have your first REM sleep. Then you go back 1, 2, 3, and you spend longer in 3 there, and less time in 4. So as the night progresses, you spend less time in REM sleep. In NREM stage 3, 4 sleep. Then you move back up, and you might not go into stage 1 and 2 there, and you go back down. Then you'll have another REM cycle, then you'll go down. And you see in cycle 3, and remember, each cycle of these goes for 90 minutes. You're spending longer in stage 2 and longer in stage 3, but in this cycle, you're no longer going to stage 4 sleep. It just doesn't happen anymore. Then you go back up, have a longer period in REM sleep, then you go back down, and now you don't even go into stage 3 or 4 sleep. Then you might awaken, maybe, about 2 a.m. in the middle of the night, you need to go to the toilet. So you have a brief awakening, and it might also be that you wake up for, maybe a couple of seconds and then roll back over. So you spend some time in stage 1, and then you'll have another REM, and then you'll wake up again. You might go into stage 2, and then you'll have an even longer REM period, and then you'll wake up. And this is a time where you're most likely going to remember your dream. So the thing to take away from this is the fact that you are going to be having, more NREM stage 3, 4 sleep at the start of the night, but it starts to disappear at the end, and you'll have brief periods of REM at the start of the night, but these increase at the end. So, here's a little indicator for you. Please note, the hypnogram appears regularly in the exam. They just do it. They like to be mean. So it's important to know how to read it. The green represents when you're awake. The purple is a REM period or dreaming. The shades of grey are the stages of sleep. You'll see this as the night progresses. You are less likely to experience stage 3 and 4 NREM sleep and more NREM. So less NREM, more REM. So when we're looking at sleep, remember that an ultradian rhythm is usually an example of a sleep cycle, which usually takes about 90 minutes. So each complete cycle consists of a period of NREM sleep, but not necessarily all 4 stages like I showed in the histogram, and a period of REM sleep. Generally, in the ideal case of a normal young adult who sleeps well, each cycle is repeated about 5 or 6 times per night, depending on the duration of the sleep. So if you happen to go to bed at 2 a.m. and get up at 6, obviously you're not going to have 5 or 6 sleep cycles in the night, you're going to have less. So, the NREM-REM sleep cycle is measured from sleep onset to the end of the first REM period, and is about 70 to 100 minutes. However, it's generally considered to be about 90 minutes on average. So if you ever get that question, consider it to be 90 minutes, or it can be 70 to 100. So this is a good table to put into your notes. So let's go into detail. So NREM sleep is traditionally subdivided into 4 stages, although some researchers now describe only 3 stages by combining stages 3 and 4, and sometimes VCAR likes to do that. Approximately 75 to 80% of our total sleep time is spent in NREM sleep, so a majority of our night is in NREM sleep. Typically, the first half of the night has more NREM sleep than the second half of the night. Although the brain is active during NREM sleep, it is not as active as during REM sleep or during normal waking consciousness. So what's actually happening is, as the night progresses, you get less and less NREM sleep and you get more REM sleep. And although your brain is still active, it's not as active as what it would be if you're in REM or if you're in awake state. So NREM sleep is indicative of a deeper sleep, with stage 1 as the lightest and stage 4 as the deepest sleep. As the sleep gets deeper, the brain waves get slower and bigger, breathing and heart rate slow down and blood pressure drops. We also transition back again from the deep sleep of stage 4. So you'll transition from 4 back to 3, back to 2, then you'll go into REM and then you'll go back down again. So it is common to miss more than one of the NREM stages, and you will wake up during the night like I showed in that histogram. HYPNOGRAM. Anyway, so the transitional period of falling asleep. So the transition period from being awake to being asleep is usually called sleep onset. Make sure you circle that section there, so sleep onset. And the length of time it takes to transition from being awake to being asleep is usually called sleep latency. So the amount of time that it takes you to actually fall asleep is sleep latency. This pre-sleep period may last for a minute or 2 and is normally followed by stage 1 of NREM sleep. Sleep onset is often called a hypnagogic state because of the unusual hallucinatory type perceptual experiences that may occur. So let's say, for example, as you're falling asleep, you might get, vivid lights, or you may hear things, and they're not there. You just, you're hallucinating them. So these may also include visual, tactile, auditory, and movement sensations, such as flashes of light or colour, feelings of floating and weightlessness, dreamlike images that resemble vivid photographs, or a sense of falling or slipping. A hypnagogic state is accompanied by a distinguishable brainwave and may also be experienced when transitioning from being asleep to being awake. So in other words, when we are falling asleep, going from being awake to asleep, we go through sleep latency. Sleep latency goes for approximately 1 to 2 minutes before going into stage 1 sleep. You are not asleep yet, you're just falling asleep. So sleep latency is sometimes referred to as a hypnagogic state, as you may experience bright flashes of light or colour, dreamlike images, and a feeling of weightlessness. During this time, you may feel like you're drifting off to sleep, but are somewhat aware that you are still awake. So that's that point where you're so tired that you start to sort of drift and you're going in and out of that whole thing. So the first stage. So NREM stage 1 occurs when we drift into and out of a true sleep state. So at some point you've fallen asleep, but then you may wake up and you may not even realize that you're awake, or that you're asleep. We tend to gradually lose awareness of ourselves and our surroundings, but some of the time we may be aware of faint sounds in our environment. Physiological changes that indicate a lower level of bodily arousal, a decrease in heart rate, respiration, body temperature, and muscle tension. So you may want to just sort of highlight that section, and I have said that up there. There are some slow rolling eye movements that may also be observed. As a result of the muscles relaxing, we sometimes experience involuntary muscle twitches, as if our body or a part of our body seems to go into a spasm. These are known as hypnic jerks. So there'll be a point in the night as your muscles start to relax, and because they've been so tense all day, they might kick out or they might move suddenly. So these are hypnic jerks. You may want to circle that or highlight that in some way. So there is an overall slowdown in the brainwave pattern as irregular theta waves start to mix with and then replace rhythmic alpha waves. Now you don't need to know the brainwave names as associated with sleep. You don't need to because they've taken it out this year. However, you may need to know it at some point. So stage 1 in the first NREM or REM cycle of a normal young adult lasts for about 5 minutes after falling asleep. In relation to an entire sleep episode, NREM stage 1 accounts for about 4 to 5% of the total sleep time. You can be easily awakened. And stage 1 has a low arousal threshold, meaning that you can be awoken easily by the simplest of little sounds. Right? If you are awoken during this stage, it almost feels like you haven't fallen asleep at all. So NREM stage 2. It is still a period of light sleep. So if you happen to fall asleep and then suddenly get woken up, you won't even think that you're actually asleep. You may be a little groggy, but you still don't believe that you are. But stage 2 is when people are said to be truly asleep. It's harder to wake you up than what it is in stage 1, but you can be woken easily. So stage 2 in the first cycle lasts for about 10 to 25 minutes and lengthens with each successive cycle, eventually constituting about 45 to 55% of the total sleep episode, which is the bulk of an average person's sleep per night. So you spend a lot of time in stage 2. Stage 2 NREM sleep, your body movements lessen, breathing becomes more regular, blood pressure and temperature continue to fall, heart rate is slower, and eye movements stop. Right? Doesn't mean that they're completely everything shut down, it just means it starts to slow down. So the brainwave pattern is slower, predominantly theta waves. Once again, you don't need to know that. All you need to know is that it's slower. There are brief bursts of rapid brain waves called sleep spindles. So what's actually happening is, right, there'll be points in your readout for the brain waves where it's very, very fast. The frequency of the waves are very, very fast, lasting for about 1 to 2 seconds periodically. And their presence is usually indicated by most researchers that the person is truly asleep. So the best way to determine if somebody is truly asleep is to see if they have sleep spindles. Stage 3 NREM sleep. So stage 3 is the start of the deepest period of sleep. It has been described as moderately deep sleep and usually gets combined with stage 4, and it's usually very, very quick. So it's a transitionary stage between stage 2 and stage 4. Stage 3 typically lasts for only a few minutes, sometimes up to 10, and constitutes about 3 to 8% of total sleep time. In sleep cycles, in the latter half or so of a sleep episode, there may be no stage 3 sleep at all. So remember, at the end of the sleep, or your sleep, you start to have less and less stage 3 and 4 NREM sleep and more REM sleep. So stage 3, your heart rate, blood pressure and body temperature continue to drop, and the breathing rate continues to be slow and steady. There is a lack of eye movement, and that is fairly common. The individual is extremely relaxed and they become less and less responsive to external stimuli. If you are awoken during this stage, it'll be very difficult for you to be awoken, and you'll actually feel very groggy. and you might even be disorientated, don't even know where you are, that sort of thing. The EEG brainwaves show further delta waves becoming increasingly prominent, and you don't really need to know it, so I'm going to skip. But they do suggest that delta waves indicate that you're in a very deep sleep, and it's slow wave sleep. So when the EEG shows that delta waves comprise more than 50% of the brainwave activity, they have entered stage 4, and it is very difficult to awaken somebody in that stage. So stage 4 NREM sleep starts. Stage 4 is a deeper sleep stage of sleep with the highest arousal threshold. It might be called very deep sleep. The physical signs of stage 4 are very similar to those in stage 3. In stage 4, our muscles are completely relaxed and we barely move. There are no eye movements. Heart rate, blood pressure and body temperature are at their lowest and most regular. And the key thing to remember about this one is that your body temperature drops by 1 degree over the period of the night. So whilst you're in stage 4, your body temperature drops by 1 degree. Delta waves are prevalent and they're even slower than in stage 3. It is very difficult to awaken somebody in stage 4. Like we're talking, you'll have to really shake them to get them to come to actually get up. When they are awoken, they can feel groggy and take several minutes to orient themselves. So you may wake up, but you struggle to actually do anything. This is sometimes referred to as sleep drunkenness. And although psychologists and VCAR prefer the term sleep inertia when referring to the post-awakening mental lag. Please highlight, there's a reason why I put that in capitals. So if you take a while to wake up, it's sleep inertia. And it's sort of like, you're drunk, you're groggy, you can't, function. So in the first sleep cycle, a person may spend 20 to 40 minutes in stage 4. But as you progress throughout the night, you are spending less and less time in stage 4, and towards the end of the night, you don't spend any time in it whatsoever. So stage 4 only makes up about 10 to 15% of total sleep time. So you might only have 2 sleep cycles, maybe 3, depending on how long your sleep is, where you're actually in deep sleep. So REM sleep is where you are dreaming. So it's approximately 20 to 25% of our total sleep time, and it is defined by spontaneous bursts of rapid eye movement during which the eyeballs quickly move beneath the closed eyelids, darting back and forth, up and down in jerky but coordinated movements. The brainwave pattern associated with REM sleep generally consists of rapid, irregular, mixed frequency activity that produced during alert wakefulness, sometimes referred to as beta-like brainwaves. Now, once again, you don't need to know which brainwave pattern it is associated with stages of sleep. However, you do need to know how the frequency and amplitude are. So the body's internal functioning is more active, so your body starts to, move around, your body's internal, so your temperature starts to go back up again, your blood pressure tends to go back up again, but your body itself is actually, it looks completely relaxed. And that's why they sometimes call it paradoxical. And we're about to go into that. So you might have some movements and some twitching. However, a majority of the time, a sleeper who is in REM sleep looks completely paralyzed. But their body, their internal organs, their heart rate, their breathing rate, it all goes up during REM sleep. But your body stays completely still. And this is why it's paradoxical sleep, because internally the brain and body are very active. However, externally the body appears calm and active. In other words, even though we are completely still, our body and mind is still very active. This is called a paradox. Sometimes this is an exam question. It comes up quite a lot. So most dreaming occurs in REM sleep. Let me make this very clear. Most dreaming occurs in REM sleep. It does not mean that it doesn't happen in the other stages. It just means that a majority of the time, dreaming occurs in REM sleep. So dreams can also occur in NREM sleep stages and can be as bizarre as those in REM sleep. But these are less frequent, less structured, less likely to be recalled, and less vivid than those of REM dreams. REM dreams tend to have a narrative structure. They tend to follow some sort of order. They tend to have a storyline, and they tend to be, realistic or complete fantasy, but they have some sort of story behind it. NREM dreams are totally bizarre, and they're not logical, and they don't follow any kind of order. So, given the nature of REM dreams and the simultaneous body paralysis, some psychologists have proposed that the loss of muscle tone inhibiting movement, sometimes called sleep paralysis, may serve as an important function of preventing an individual from acting out their dreams or nightmares while sleeping. So they're saying that our body is an adaptive function, right? It's there for our survival, to make sure that we don't act out our dreams. So REM sleep tends to lengthen and occur close together as the night progresses. Remember, there is less NREM sleep as the night progresses and more REM sleep as the night progresses. So you have less NREM, more REM. So these diagrams here is pretty good. I would probably recommend it. You may want to have a look at certain things, see how you go. So notes to take away from this lesson. There is a lot to remember, so I do recommend a table to break it up. Sleep cycles go for approximately, make sure you put in that word, approximately 90 minutes, but can go from 70 to 100, or in some cases 80 to 120, but the average is 90 minutes. There are 4 to 5 sleep cycles per night. Before we fall asleep and just as we awake, we experience a hypnagogic state, and that's where we're falling asleep. There are 4 stages of NREM sleep. So stage 1 is not quite asleep yet, so you're drifting in and out. Stage 2 is the start of true sleep. You start to see sawtooth waves and sleep spindles, and it is the true indication that somebody is actually in this stage. In stage 3 is the start of deep sleep, also known as slow wave sleep, and stage 4 is your deepest sleep. REM sleep is beta-like brainwaves and is a stage of rapid eye movement where we dream. Body is completely still, but our minds and internal organs are active. We experience less NREM sleep as the night progresses and more REM sleep, especially towards the morning, and that's why you're more likely to remember your last dream, because you tend to wake up during it. Okay, so this is a question that stumped a lot of people when it was released in 2018, I think. So the figure below is a hypnogram represented in the sleep cycle of an healthy adult. So you need to make sure that you can understand this, because this was a question that stumped so many. So the question is asking, outline 2 differences between rapid eye movement, REM sleep, and non-rapid eye movement, NREM sleep, evident in the hypnogram to the left. So because it's asking for outline 2, we know that it's going to be about 2 marks. Because it's only saying outline, it's not going into detail, it's just outlining 2 differences that will be evident here. So you're not just making them up, it has to be shown in the hypnogram. So 1 mark can be awarded for each valid difference or comparison between NREM and REM sleep, evident from the hypnogram, with 2 valid differences or comparisons being required. So acceptable differences included, but were not limited to, REM duration becomes longer over the later sleep cycles, whereas NREM becomes shorter. So we can see that REM is shorter here, but gets longer. So we can see that. So that's 1 mark. NREM stages 3 and 4 are generally evident in the first couple of cycles, whereas REM occurs throughout the night. So we can see that as well. So NREM stages 3 and 4 are in the first couple of stages, but NREMs all throughout. Overall time in NREM is greater than REM, so we can say that as well. We've got, based on the hypnogram, all this time here is NREM, just this section here is REM. Non-REM sleep has 4 stages and REM has 1. Nice and simple. So the answer is pretty clear, but you had to make sure that it was related to what you can see in the hypnogram. You couldn't say that NREM stages involve beta brainwaves, because that's not in the actual hypnogram. So you need to make sure that you are relating it specifically. Hope that helps. Please try to study that one. Alright, do the exam questions on your own.